Folks, give it up for Taylor Otwell.
All right, thanks for coming. It's the last talk of the day, so be sure to stick around for the after party afterwards. We'll have lots of food and drinks, and you can check out the science exhibits and stuff like that. So this is the 6th Laracon. I think it's about the 12th. This is the 6th Laracon US, and I think it's the 12th Laracon around the world. Who was at the very first Laracon in Washington, D.C.? Yeah. See a couple hands. I think we only had 90 people, and then we went to New York, which is where, well, at DC, I announced that Laravel 4.0 was coming the next May. And we went to New York in 2014, I think, and that's when Laravel Forge and Homestead were announced, and we had about 250 people. And then we went to Louisville and announced Laravel Spark in the next year, in 2015, and that was about 550 people. Then the next year we had, also in Louisville, Laravel Passport, Laravel Scout, Laravel Notifications, and I think Laravel Echo maybe was all that year. And then of course, last year in New York was Laravel Horizon. And this is the biggest Laracon yet in 2018 with 850 people. So thanks a lot for coming. I know it's a big investment to buy tickets and fly across the country and stuff like that. So just a quick update on what's been happening in the Laravel world. If you keep up with the release cycle, you know that we have a release every 6 months. So that means we have a release in February and August. So typically the releases come out at Laracon EU, and I kind of demo some stuff here at Laracon US, and it comes out the following month. And as the framework has matured, you know, the releases have gotten sort of less radical if you've been around since like Laravel 1, for example. Less radical than the jumps from Laravel 1 to 2 to 3 and even to 4 and 5. The releases are usually, you know, simple upgrades now and have nice, convenient features, but they're not really paradigm shifting updates like there used to be. So what does that mean for Laravel 5.7, which will come out in August? The breaking changes are pretty minimal. Most people will probably be able to upgrade in, you know, just 5 minutes or so, just like you did to Laravel 5.6. But there are a few features I wanted to point out to start out the talk. One really requested feature over the years has been email verification. So in Laravel 5.7, there's a new interface that you can mark your user models with that says must verify email. And what this does is if you use make auth to generate the auth scaffolding, this gives you, when someone signs up, they'll be redirected to an email verification kind of page that tells them they need to check their email, click the verification link, and then they'll be ready to use the system. So you don't really have to code that by hand anymore, which hopefully makes a lot of people happy. That's been a pretty popular feature request. Policies have a new feature where using the new PHP 7.2, I believe, was this version, optional type hints, you can specify that a policy can be called with so-called guest users that aren't logged in. So basically it would be null, would be passed in as user. This is sort of an edge case scenario, but also sort of a highly requested feature that will be coming in Laravel 5.7. Another feature that I think is really cool is the dump server from Symfony has been ported over into Laravel. So how this works is you do artisan dump server, dump-server, and then if you have like little dump function calls throughout your code, they don't actually go to the browser. They get displayed in this terminal window, and it shows you where they came from, what file, what line, and sort of what got dumped out. So it's actually a really handy little feature. If you're used to it kind of garbling up your HTML, it doesn't really have to do that anymore. So that's really cool. Let's see. There's a handful of other small quality of life improvements, tuple syntax for route action URLs, easier fly system streams, and a few other things. But overall, it's you know, pretty much a maintenance release with a few nice, convenient features. And typically, I would demo some of this stuff, but there's a lot of other stuff to talk about today that we need to kind of dig into, which is what I've been kind of working on for the last few months, along with Steve Shoger, the Laravel designer, and David Hemphill, who kind of teamed up with me on it. And that is Laravel Nova. So what is it? And there's been a lot of guesses on what this is. Cryptocurrencies, dating apps, all kinds of things. But I'm just going to walk through it with a demo, and we can just take a look at it right now, and you can see it firsthand. So Laravel Nova is a really beautiful looking admin system for Laravel, backend admin panel. So I want you to get all the bad memories of bad admin panels that you've ever experienced out of your head, because I feel like we really sweat the small stuff with Laravel Nova and really put a lot of thought into how we wanted it to work and how it should work. And I think it created a pretty refined product that you're really going to like. So Nova, like I said, it's all custom design. This isn't like some bootstrap clunky admin that you might be used to. And it's installed as a composer package just into any Laravel application. So you can use this with existing Laravel applications. It's sort of unlike Spark, which sort of entangles itself in your application, so to speak. And that's sort of the deal you make with using Spark, right? Is that you're agreeing to sort of let Spark control all your settings pages and billing for the benefit of saving all this time. And it's kind of totally different with Nova. Nova just sits beside your application. You don't touch your existing code at all, actually. And just gives you this really nice admin panel to explore all your data. So this is sort of what it looks like when you install Nova. It's built as a single-page view application using Tailwind CSS by Adam Wathan. And of course, a Laravel JSON API is feeding it all this data. And when we jump right in, you can see we get this list of resources over here on the side. And if I jump into here, I get, of course, just a nice index of my users. And let's take a look at what that looks like on the back end, because how I said, this doesn't interact with your code. So each eloquent model in my Nova directory has a corresponding resource. So here I have a user resource that just has a fields method where I'm defining the fields I want to display in Nova. So in this case, I'm showing the ID, a gravatar, which is just sort of a virtual field. It doesn't correspond to anything in the database, but it uses your database to calculate the gravatar URL and display it in the index. Of course, the name, the email, the password, and a few other fields which we'll get into later. All right, so it's not hooking into my eloquent models. It's not storing any configuration in the database like, more like a CMS might do. It's purely code-driven. Everything you do is in simple PHP classes. There's no funky database structure or anything that it creates. All right, and so, of course, if we go back to this index, it's searchable, so I can search for Adam and get really quick search results. I can search by IDs and get search results. It's sortable. If the field is marked as sortable, I can quickly sort through my data and by whatever fields I want. And it just feels really snappy and quick to use with it being a single-page view application. All right, so if I drill down into an individual user, let's say me, I get this nice detail page. And what's really cool is some admin panels, you just get sort of this user. But what's nice about Nova is I get really great insight into my relationships right from this detail page. I can even paginate through them, search them. So this search is scoped to this user. So if I search for that ID, of course I get a result because I have one. But if I search for an ID that doesn't belong to me, I don't get that. So it's really quick to dig into the model's relationships and explore the data. All right. And on this detail page, you can even group fields into separate panels if you wanted to. So if I come into my Nova resource again, in my list of fields, let's just make a new panel here called extra fields, let's say. And I'll just move these two fields into here for now. All right, let's import that panel class. You see, this just creates an extra panel. So if you have a lot of fields, it can be nice to break those up into extra panels so they're easier to read. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just get that out of there because we don't really need that for now. And you can see these fields I'm hiding from the index. So I can control what fields are actually going to be displayed on the index, which fields are going to be displayed on the detail screen, which fields are going to be only on the form screen maybe, and have pretty fine-grained control over that. All right, so if I refresh that, that panel should be gone. Of course, we can create entirely new resources like you would expect from sort of a CRUD admin panel type of thing. So if I go to my post resource, let's say, and of course here this belongs to a user, so I get a nice link to the user that owns this post, so I can dig into that. And of course, I can just create a new post here where I can select the user that I want to associate this post with. So maybe with Taylor Otwell, and then post title, post body, and give it a published at date. And just create that post, and I go to this post detail screen. Now for these text areas, you can see I can expand the content of this text area. It doesn't always show it on the detail screen, so it's not really bloating up the screen all the time. It's only there when you need it. What's also cool is, in this example, I created the post from the post index, but say I'm viewing a user, I can hop into that user, skip down here to post, hit create post, and that user's already locked in there with that field. So now I can just create my new post just like that. It all feels really fast and snappy to use as you're using it, with it being so richly built on the client side. And every type of relationship is supported in Nova. So of course, this is a simple belongs to, has many type of relationship, but if you need to update the pivot data on a polymorphic many-to-many soft deleting relationship, that's going to work just as easily. And we'll dig into some of those more advanced relationships in a minute. Updating resources, of course, we can do that. If I hop into my detail screen, this time I'm just going to hit the E key for edit to hop into the edit mode. And of course, can update anything we want to do here. And of course, our data is updated. And let's see. What's great is these are just eloquent operations behind the scenes, right? It's not a bunch of crazy magic necessarily happening behind the scenes. So what that means is you can still hook observers into your eloquent models and interact with all of these events that are happening in Nova. So in this example, I have a user observer that's listening for this updated event. And I'm just going to write to the log file that the user was updated when this runs. So my log file up here, we already see a couple updates. I'll clear those out. But since this is attached to the user, if I edit this user, of course, that event's going to be handled. It's going to write to the log. So you can listen to all the events there, updating, updated, restoring, restored, deleting, all of that, and hook into different aspects of what's going on in your system. All right, and so we saw that users have validation rules here. Like for example, I can assign different creation rules, different update rules, or sometimes the rules are the same, so I just call it with one method. And of course, Nova is going to handle displaying all those rules for you. So if I hit update user, I get a nice validation error there. So you have great control over validation, and of course you can use the closures for validation or the custom rule objects. All the same rules that you would use in a normal Laravel application are available to you in Nova. Another aspect of the update is we have support for warning users or blocking users from updating a post if it's been updated since they started editing the post. Or whatever resource they're updating. In this case, it's a post, but it could be like, say, a server if you're running an application like Forge. I could go into this server 5. Let's pull that up in the database here. I have this servers table, and for number 5, I'm just going to say that it was updated some far date in the future that's going to be, beyond when I'm going to update it. And if I try to update that, I get this error that another user has updated the resource since the page was loaded. So I can't overwrite stuff unintentionally, so to speak. So that's all baked right in, and you don't have to really worry about that. Of course, we can delete users. We can delete users from the index, or we can delete them from the detail page. So I can select a few users here, and or select all matching, and then delete the selected. Just like that. Now, select all matching, what that means is, say I do a search for like ID of 2, and I hit select all matching. It will select every resource matching the current filter state or search or however you want to think about it. So even if they're not all displayed on this page, even if it's paginated, and then I can hit delete selected, and that will be gone, and I'll clear my search. So that's really handy if you want to do a search and then delete everything matching that search. You can do it really quickly right there from the UI. What about soft deletes? So soft deletes are another feature in Laravel where when you delete a model, it just sets the deleted at column on the database to the current date of whenever you're deleting it, and it doesn't actually remove it from the database. So in this case, I deleted some users, so they're missing. Let me reseed my database here. So in this case, posts are marked as soft deleting if we looked at that eloquent model. So this is marked as soft deletes with a soft deletes trait. And if I jump into this and hit delete on this post, it's gone, but since this resource is soft deleting, Nova knows to let me show with trashed or only trashed or just the default state of hiding the trashed model. So if I hit with trashed, we'll see that comes back, and now I have a nice restore icon here instead of a delete icon, and I can just restore that model right there. We tried to make everything work really smooth and really intuitive. So let's go ahead and we can also do, a batch delete or a batch delete here like I did on the other page. And of course, since this is soft deleting, we have a new option here to force delete the selected resources. So here I'm just going to delete these. And then since we're still in the with trash state, there they all are. Or I could jump to only trashed, and there, of course, we only get the soft deleted models. I'm going to go ahead and select all the matching ones there. Restore selected. And they should be back into the table. All right, so it's really fast to interact with soft deleted models. Really makes it a breeze. See, sorry I have to look down at my notes. There's just so much to cover. I need to kind of keep myself on track here. So when stuff is trashed, of course, our search is sort of respecting the filter state. They all work together. So if I'm not showing the trashed models and I search for that ID, I'm not going to get it. Whereas if I do this, the search shows up. And then all these URLs can be permalinked. So you can send this link to someone, and they'll get exactly the screen you're seeing, even though you've done quite a few client-side operations. We try to make it where you can link directly to the view you're seeing at all times. All right, so that's sort of the basic create, read, update, delete scenarios, kind of the core skeleton of the CRUD aspect of Nova. So let's jump in. I want to look at a few other fields before we move on to other stuff. We've seen, the basic fields like text area and text box so far, but there's some really cool other fields I want to jump into. So let's go back to the post screen and look at that date field. What's really cool about this is, let's go ahead and see that published at, it's set in Chicago time right now on the front end, but in my database, that's actually UTC time. And so what Nova is doing is intelligently localizing the dates on the front end so that if I was in Europe, I would see it in my time, 24-hour time. I wouldn't see AM, PM. And you can configure what time zone. If you have a user time zone on your database table, you could say always use this time zone for this user. But by default, it's just going to use my browser settings to give me the time that makes sense to me. And the same way when I'm editing this post, I just set the publish time in a time that makes sense for my time zone. And Nova will take care of getting it to UTC or whatever your time zone is in the back end automatically. So if I set this to July 24th at noon, update that post, and I look at this in the database, see if I can I don't know if I can make that bigger, but the updated at, or the published at is 1700, it's not noon. So it's been offset by the correct time zone offset, and you don't really have to worry about it. It all just works for your users, it works for you, and it makes sense. So we try to make those little details really work very cleanly so that it's a really clean product. So let's explore another field. So our blog text area, we can spruce that up a little bit. We don't just have to use a plain text area. So let's go into our post resource again. Remember, this is just a class that corresponds to our eloquent model. Each eloquent model usually has one Nova resource that sort of describes how it should look in Nova. You don't change your actual model code. That all stays the same. All right, so right now I'm using the text area field, but we can easily switch that to, say, a Markdown field. Let's import that. Now when I edit this, I get this nice Markdown editor. So I can add some Markdown text, get a nice preview of the Markdown here. Supports, of course, bold, italic, images, lists, tables, all the stuff you would want to do in Markdown. And I can just update that post. And just like the text area, we get a nice hide and show content here. So it just works really nice. But maybe Markdown's not your thing. We can do a tricks field from Basecamp. It's another cool editor. Let's hop into edit. And now we have a tricks field, tricks editor. So we can select that text and hit bold. Thanks for clapping. It's keeping me encouraged, actually. It's high energy. The user table has a column that I haven't been showing in Nova yet, but there's actually, if I look at that migration, I have this options column that's a text field, and what I'm wanting to do with this column is just store JSON in it. So it's just going to be a JSON object that contains that user's preferences or options, because I don't want a column for each individual option that I may add to my app. Have any of you ever made a column kind of like this? Yes, no? Okay. So if I hop into this user thing, user resource, like I said, I don't have anything defined for that. So let's go ahead and do that. And I have a little snippet here I think I can just grab. Code field snippet, okay. And let's put that under country, let's say. Go ahead and make sure that's imported. And I'm going to say code make options, and I'm going to say this is going to be JSON, so I'm going to chain that JSON method on, and I'm just going to use the JSON Laravel validation rule to make sure that it's valid JSON coming into the server. Now let's take a look at our users. All right, so Laravel's kind of intelligent about what it will show on the index by default. So like if you add a text field to a resource, that's going to be on the index by default unless you say don't show this on the index. But if you put a text area or a code field or a markdown field on a resource, Nova knows that never makes sense on the index. You're never going to put a big block of code right in your index. So it knows to just hide that unless you tell it to show it on the index. But if I hop into this user now, edit it, I get this nice code editor. And now I get a nice display of my JSON data. But we wouldn't have to store JSON in this field. We could paste a big chunk of PHP in there. We could even probably just grab this file. Just kind of going off the cuff here. But and of course, we'll want to remove some validation stuff. So I think we can do something like, you can control what language. All right, let's give this a shot. So you get a nice code field, nice syntax highlighting right there in your admin dashboard. All right, I'm going to remove that field for now. Kind of get back to my clean slate. Let's take another look at another kind of field, which is a file field for file uploads. Because of course, many apps accept file uploads. I'm just going to blow out all those changes we may have done there. And I'm going to switch to a file field branch here, reseed my database. All right, and here I have a photo resource, which I created just on this branch. And if I look at that back end, Nova Photo, in the fields, you see I have the usual ID field, name field, which is sortable. I'm going to be storing the original name from the client, and I'm also going to be storing the size. And on the size, I'm passing in a closure that I want to use to format that size on the front end, because it's going to store the size in bytes. So I want to format that to kilobytes for this example. And I'm only going to show that on the detail screen. And then one cool thing that I like to do in this fields method, because if you have a lot of fields, it can get a little bit just kind of bloated, is I'll just extract a field out into a method. So here I'm just saying photo field, which is just a method that returns a field. And in this case, it's a file field, and I'm going to tell it which disk I want to store it on using the storage system. Tell it I want to store the original name and the original size, which both of these methods are optional. I wouldn't have to do either of those things. The creation rules, the update rules, and prunable, which I'll talk about in just a second. All right, so if we look at this photo resource, come in here to create a photo. We'll just give it a name. I have a little file here on my desktop. Just a little drawing of me. Create the photo. And we've created the photo, and you can see my size and the original name, but you can see the photo just shows the name of the file by default, and that's because I'm using the file field type. Let's go ahead and switch that to an image since we intend to store images here. Now we're going to get a nice preview of the image that's in our system. And of course, we can download it here. Now to edit the photo, of course, we can just hit E to edit. If we don't change the photo, it knows just to use the same photo. So we don't have to worry about that. If we edit the photo and the field is nullable, let's say, we can say we want to remove this photo entirely. Update, now it's just kind of null in the database. There's no photo attached to this resource. I'll go ahead and reattach it here. All right, and now by default, this is all using sort of a convention of where and how to store things, but you can override every aspect of this file storage. You can override how it's stored, you can override how this thumbnail URL is generated, you can override how the files are deleted. That way, if you're using a different sort of file storage thing, like maybe a media library, you can call that from within these hooks. So I want to show you what that looks like. So right now, this is just sort of what it looks like with the default behavior. So let me show you the equivalent if you were to override the storage and deletion. So I'm going to go into my snippets here, get this custom store and delete. I'm going to just put that in place of this. And so this is doing the exact same thing, but I just wanted to show you the override hooks. So here I'm calling this store method, which I just give it a closure, which is going to receive the request and is responsible for storing the photo. In this case, I've extracted that out into a method called store photo, which is just going to return an array. And this array corresponds to what we want to store in the columns in the database. So I'm saying I want to store photo as this value, original name as this value, size as this value, so I can update multiple columns at once when I store this. Delete, I'm passing a closure, and this is responsible for deleting it. So I'm saying if we have a photo, just delete it off the disk and null out these fields in the database. So if I run this code, let me make sure this facade's in there. If I run this code, it should be the exact same behavior that we were seeing before. So I can delete it, update, and we'll reattach it here. And it works the exact same as you would expect. So I wanted you to be able to hook into all of that. Now, another cool thing you can do is, again, this is an area that could get kind of messy, like if you have these big closures with file storage logic. So I actually have this delete photo invocable class that has that delete logic in it. And what I can do is, instead of passing a closure, let's just say new delete photo. Now if I edit this, delete it, update, it's deleted. So this is a common theme throughout Nova. I could pass an invocable object to the store method, to the delete method, to the thumbnail generation method, and it lets you build really clean classes without bulking up this whole resource, if that makes sense. Is that pretty cool? Now let me make sure my storage directory is all cleared out. Okay, so we only have the one file. So since we marked this as prunable, what this means is, hopefully if I delete this resource, the underlying file in the storage system will also be deleted. All right, so it looks like I still have one file from earlier testing. So let's go ahead and attach one. And if we jump into Sublime, now we have the two photos out there. So when I delete this photo, I should see one of them disappear. So I'm going to hop in here, delete this resource, and we only have one file left on the file system. So it just cleans up your files for you. If you or whoever's using the admin system is deleting records that have attached files, they're automatically getting pruned out of your storage system. That's just another feature we wanted to add so that Nova works in this really intuitive and convenient way. All right, so I'm going to switch back to the master branch now that I've showed you the file uploads. All right, let's hop back into the user index. And I want to take a closer look at that belongs to field on the post that I was showing you earlier. So if you remember when I was creating a post, I got this drop down of the available users. And that's great because we only have 6 users in this drop down. But what if we had 5,000 users in this drop down? So let's go ahead and put 5,000 users in the system. All right, so I'm going to go to my database seeder. I'm going to jump down here to the bottom. I'm going to uncomment this line right here. Factory user 5,000, create. All right. Let's go ahead and run this. This MFS alias I'm using is migrate fresh seed. It's just a little shortcut I'm doing. All right, so now let's go to that user index, and you see I have 5,000 users. So, of course, I can still search on this and do whatever I want. But if we go to the post and create a post, now, for one, this takes a second to load, but this just isn't very convenient, It feels like admins could do better than this. But a lot of times this is what you get, if you're installing an admin panel. But we wanted to really think things through. So let's go into our Nova post resource, and let's try to clean this up a little bit. And let's do that by just saying searchable. All right, and let's search for Taylor. All right, and I can make my post, publish it. It's really great. So no more scrolling through, maybe even more users, maybe 10,000 users. Just get fast search. All right, and now this is doing, how is the search working? How is the search on the index working? How's the search in that dropdown working? And right now it's working like this. In Nova user, I have this little array called search, and I'm just saying ID, name, and email, and these are the columns I want to search. But if you're familiar with the Laravel ecosystem, we have a really good search package called Laravel Scout. So what if all my data is in Algolia or some other search system that's supported by Laravel Scout? Nova can take advantage of that too, so let's check that out. I'm going to go to my user model here. I'm just going to mark that as searchable. This is a Scout trait. I'm going to go to Artisan, Scout, Flush, App User. I'm just going to make sure I don't have anything out there. I talked to Algolia, and they gave me an API key with unlimited operations, so hopefully we're good to go here. I'm just going to import all those 5,000 users into my Algolia index. Now, I don't have to do anything else in Nova. It says, when it sees a user model marked as searchable with the Scout trait, it says, oh, okay, we'll just use Scout for searching. If I search, it's using Scout now. It's going all the way out to Algolia servers. And what's great is, say I make a typo on this name, see, I still get the result. Whereas if that was not searchable in Algolia, that's not going to happen. You don't get that nice fuzzy search. So Nova can hook right into the power of cloud search pretty seamlessly just by marking that as searchable. It's really nice. I can take that off there. And that carries over even to the post. If I'm creating a post, Taylor, that's a Scout search. There I am. All right. So whatever data is in Scout, like in this example, probably it's searching every field, the name, the email, probably even the password because I didn't configure the Algolia index. It's going to use however Algolia is configured, so it just works. All right. Now I'm going to get back to a more sane user count for this demo here. All right, hop back to my users. And I'm going to turn off Algolia because this Wi-Fi, the latency's a little bit bad. But all right, so now we're back to just our typical MySQL search. Now, one thing I've been hiding from the Nova dashboard this far, something that's really cool. So let me hop into the base resource class for my application. And I've been overriding this globally searchable property. If I reload this and hit / on the index, I get to search across all my resources. Now, this is searching across everything. I can just arrow down, hit enter, and I'm right on that resource. It's really fast. I can even display subtext. So this post, in this case, I'm on every post query. Let me show you what that looks like on the back end. If I go into Nova Post, there's a with property where I'm saying I want you to eager load the users. So that means that on my subtitle, I can access that user information to put it right there in the search results. So then if I search for that, I see the post and also who authored it. Let me quickly jump into that and know a little bit more about it. What do you think about the global search? I think it's pretty fast. And of course, I was opting out of global search for all resources, but if you have some resources that just don't make sense for global search, you could just turn just those off for global search and include only the resources that make sense for your application. All right, so that's another look at the belongs to field. Let me show you another field called the place field. All right, I'm gonna clear that out. What's this branch called? User address. I'm gonna reseed my database here. All right, now I've added a few more fields in this branch to the user resource. So if I jump down here, you can see I've got this address fields method that I've extracted out. And I'm using the this merge method. Now these methods may look familiar because if you've used Eloquent API resources, all of the same methods like merge when, are all available to you. So I've extracted this out and say I want to merge this into the original fields array. That way I can extract like a group of fields into this other method and keep my class nice and clean. So in this case, I've added, just a typical address set of columns into my database. Address, address line 1, or address line 2, and blah, 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 city, state, whatever. All right, and I'm hiding all those from the index because I don't really need them on the main index. So if I jump into, for example, my user here, right now they're all null, so if I edit them, let's go ahead and fill this out. This is my, my childhood address that I grew up at, Hot Springs, Arkansas, 1901, and that's in the United States. And we can update it. So whatever, just simple text fields. Now, what's really cool, it'll be faster just to run this command. Let me just blow that data out. Let's come back into there and let's switch this to a place. Let's edit this and check this out. What's cool about this is you don't need any Algolia account to use this. You don't need to pay anything to use this. You can use this for free with Nova right out of the box the first day without doing anything else. And I think it supports 30 operations per second or something like that from your site. So I mean, you have plenty of room to use it. And it fills in all those other fields. And you can customize this field a little bit to where you can control which countries it's searching in. So if you only want to search in the US address, if that makes sense for your business, you can specify that. If you only want to search in some, a European country, you can specify that. If you only want to search for a city, you don't want to show street addresses at all, you can also do that. So it's really great, really fast for working with addresses. All right, so that's a look at some of the other more interesting field types in Nova. So let's jump back into relationships a little bit. I'm going to swap back out to the master branch. Refresh here. And let's look at many-to-many relationships, because so far we've only looked at has, many, and belongs to. We haven't seen anything else. So in this application, I've got roles and users, and that's a many-to-many relationship. So it's a belongs to many in Eloquent. And In this case, my pivot table on this relationship, or my intermediate table, has an extra column, notes, right here. Sorry, that's kind of small. So Nova can handle that really well. So if I look at this resource definition, go to the roles field, I say belongs to many roles, and I can call the fields right here, pass it a closure, and return a whole nother set of fields for that pivot table. So that means when I go to a user, say let's go to my detail page, let's go down to roles, and let's hit attach role. All right, I can choose my roles, I can update my notes, attach. Now if I go down here to roles, I see that pivot table data right there. So it makes it really easy to work with those situations. If I look at my database, it's right there in the pivot table. All right, so of course I can update this. And since this is a many-to-many, when I click update here, we're not going to update the role. We're going to update the pivot table. So I can update those notes right there, and it updates the pivot table information. In the same way, if I hit delete here, it says, do you want to detach this resource? We're not deleting the role, since this is a many-to-many. If we wanted to do that, we would just go to that role and hit delete. But since we're on the user detail viewing the roles relationship, we can detach that. And the role is still there. The role hasn't been deleted. We're just detaching it from that user. All right, let's see here. So polymorphic relationships. To demo polymorphic relationships, I have comments, which can belong to either videos or can belong to posts. All right, so if I go to create a comment, first let's do my user, which is still searchable. All right, so we did that. And now since this is a morphable relationship, I have to pick what do I want, what type of morphable entity am I creating this for? So a post or a video. So I'm going to select video. Let's search star for Star Trek. There's my video, my comment, and we create the comment. And now on the detail screen, we have a nice display of the user it belongs to, the video it belongs to, and we can jump into any of those, see the comment, just like that, see the content comment. It's really great. Now what's also cool is remember that posts were soft deleting. So let's go back to comment, create comment. Now, in the previous example I did video, but if I do post, it knows that that's soft deleting. It says, do I want to include the trash results right here? So I don't think we have any trashed, but if I click this, now it's going to show me the trash results when I search. So Nova's really intelligent about the state of your application, so it knows to prompt you for things like that. And that way, if you want to attach a comment to something that's already been trashed or soft deleted in the database, you can do so really easily. All right, so I'm going to select that post there, and we can create a comment for a post. All right, if we're on the comments index, on the commentable, which is our kind of polymorphic field, we see that this one's attached to a post, this one's attached to a video. We're going to jump right in to whatever it belongs to. All right, so full support for every type of relationship. Now, what's really cool is I want to show you something in this video resource. So you can see I have the movie poster here for Star Trek 2. But what's really neat is that's not stored in my database at all. And this is a cool feature where I can show you kind of the flexibility that Nova has. So if I jump into that, in this case I'm using an avatar field, and an avatar field that's what determines what's shown in the search results. So when I search for users, you've seen that little avatar of the person's head, or you've seen the movie poster. If a resource has an avatar field, that's what's used in the search results. So in this case, I have an avatar field, and I'm overriding the thumbnail method with an invocable object called retrieve movie poster. And if we look at that, all it's doing is making an API call to this movie API, getting the post URL and returning it, and I'm just caching that forever using the Laravel cache system. And I'm just going to say, don't show that on forms. So I can leverage this field and override that thumbnail method to display an image that's not stored in my application at all. And so what that allows me to do is if I create a new video, say for Jaws, it's just going to pull that poster straight from the API. really cool. So I'll just update that to Wall Street, let's say. We get that movie poster. It's really nice. So that's just a small example of kind of how you can get creative with these fields and do some pretty cool stuff. All right, and we can see that on the index. All right, so now let's go back to the index and kind of look at something totally new here. All right, so we've seen over here, I've showed this a little bit with the soft deleting stuff, and of course you can control how many resources are shown per page, but we can also add our own filters right into this drop-down. All right, so we've seen previously when we've kind of dug into these users, I have this active field for Boolean, just true or false, and I can edit that. We'll make Samantha inactive here, and then it just shows false there on active. And so I've got a little filter defined here to filter by active or inactive. And if we look at my Nova folder, I've got a filter. I'm just calling it active users. Now I need to attach that to a resource. So if I go into my Nova user, it has a filters method. Right here, I'm just going to return the filters that I want to be available on this resource. So in this case, I'm going to say active users. Since I'm newing up an object, I can pass it anything it needs for this request. All right, so I'm going to refresh this. And now we get this nice filter added in here where I can show only active users, only inactive, or the default state. So only inactive users right now is just Samantha. So what's that look like behind the scenes? So this filter class, it's really simple. It just has an apply method that receives the request, the query, and a value. And you define the options that are in that little filter dropdown. So only active or only inactive, and it's going to pass me this little slug here. All right, so in this case, I'm just going to say, think of these as sort of a UI for eloquent scopes. So I'm saying query where active value equals only active. So if it's only active, it's going to say query where active is true. Otherwise, it's going to be where active false. All right, so it's really simple. You just modify the query however you need to and return it. And then it just shows up right there. Now, what's really cool is, let's go back to roles. Admin, let's attach a user. I'm going to attach 2 users here. See, I'll attach myself there. And I could have hit attach another there, couldn't I? And I'll put Samantha on there since she's inactive. Of course, if I hit this button, I'll be prompted just to attach another one. All right, so there's our 2 users. Now, even though I'm on the role detail page, that filter is still available to me, even here. And it's already scoped to this role. So I can see only active, only inactive. So that all carries over onto this screen as well. It's not just on the user index, the primary index. All right, and so it also applies like, say, when I'm searching. So if I hit only active and I try to search for Samantha, I don't get anything. Whereas if I switch this to only inactive, of course, I do get a result. So if I have a filter set, I can then search within that filter, and it will automatically be applied. All right? So we have a CLI generator, of course, for generating filters. I can just generate them with Artisan Nova filter and then the name of the filter that I want to make, and it will stub out that class for you. All right, so that's filters. Lenses. Lenses are similar to filters, but let you take a more radical way of looking at a resource. So in this application, let's pretend I sell licenses to some software. So each license belongs to a user and has some price that's just randomly generated. And so it's a has many belongs to relationship. And let's say I want to create something because maybe the boss or whatever wants to look at the most valuable users in the system that have generated the most revenue for our application. I can make a lens for that. All right, so I have a lens called most valuable users. And this is a more radical modification of the query. So I get the query, and in this case, I'm selecting several columns. I'm doing a group by on the sum of the revenue, joining to the licenses table, ordering by the revenue in descending order. I have full control over this eloquent query. And I'm saying I also want Nova to apply any ordering they set on the query and any filters automatically. So I can set a filter on this lens as well. And Nova will automatically apply it to it. All right? And now, a filter doesn't define fields, of course, because it's just operating on the default index. But with a lens, you can define your own fields that are specific to this lens. So in this case, when I'm viewing this view of the users, I just want to see the ID, the name, and the revenue. I don't care about anything else. and I'm passing a closure that can format that revenue with a $sign, and, decimal points and all that, however you need to format it. So let's attach that to the user. All right, so I'm just going to leave that filter on there. All right, so we can say new lenses, most valuable users. And now we get a new menu right here called lens. I can jump right to most valuable users and see a new view of my users right here. It's a really great way to build specialized, tailored views of certain resources. All right, and so if I jump back to this lens, you can see I've also attached a filter to the lens, and I'm just reusing that active users filter that we had previously. So right here, I still have that filter, leveraging that same code we already wrote. I can say only inactive users, and there's Samantha's revenue there, or I could jump to only active users and see only the active users' total lifetime revenue. So it's really great to reuse those filters even in your lenses. And of course, you could see in my backend code previously that all I had to do to get that is to say request with filters. And Nova knows to modify that query with my filters. It's really great. All right, let's see. And of course, we have backend CLI generators, Nova Lens, to generate a lens. All right, so let's look at another aspect of Nova, which is actions. Now, so far, we've just seen kind of create, read, update, and delete. But you can also attach actions to resources, which are sort of like little classes where you can do whatever you want to either a single resource or a whole batch of resources. So in this case, I've got an action that's called deactivate. And all this does is it receives some action fields and a collection of models. And it's your responsibility to do whatever you want to those models. It doesn't matter if the action is being performed on a single resource or on 100 resources, you always get a collection of models. And in this case, I'm just going to spin through the models and set the active property to false. And then I'm going to say mark as finished, which belongs to the root action class, which we'll talk about in a second. All right, now actions will have fields. On my other action, I have fields, which I'll show you in a second. But let's attach this to the user. New actions deactivate. All right. And now I'll select Samantha and TJ, and now we get this little drop down right here. We can say deactivate, run that action, and they're deactivated. You can see that TJ is now inactive. All right, and you can do whatever you want in these actions. It's a great way to sort of build, maybe you have a billing system with users and you want like a refund charge action, which maybe on your user resource you have a list of payments and you can just hit refund on some payments and run that action and it calls some Stripe API to refund the charge. Whatever you want to do, you can build into actions. And of course, we can run actions from the detail page as well. So if I'm viewing a single user and I have actions on that resource, I can get that menu right there and run that against that user as well. And now that's inactive. All right, so let's jump into roles, admin. So here also, I can select all matching and run actions from here as well. This is a good example of, let's use Forge for an example, because when I was building Nova, I used how would I want Nova on Forge, because I'm going to use Nova on Forge the first day Nova comes out. But what would I want to do? What would make sense? And so say I'm jumping into a server and I want to run an action on all of that server's sites. So in this case, this is kind of an example of that. I'm jumping into a role. I want to select all the matching users for this role, and I can run an action on all of those users right there. And it's done. So it's really easy to kind of scope your actions using these detail screens. And of course, we could have done that easily using a search. Select all matching, run the actions for everything that matches that search, even if it's not currently on the page that I'm viewing. All right? Now, if something you're doing is destructive, that's not really communicated with this nice little blue button here. So what I can do is go into that deactivate action, and I'm just going to say this is a destructive action. And all that does is just kind of change that UI to be red, make it a little more obvious. we have CLI generators for actions as well, of course. Now, what if we have an action that takes a while? Maybe it takes a few minutes. How can we handle that with Nova? It's actually really easy. Let's just jump into this action class. Let's just say should queue. All right, and I'm using the database queue driver. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and start up a worker here. All right, and let's do artisan queue work. Anytime I do queues live on stage, I get the heebie-jeebies. But all right, so I've marked that as should queue. I've got a queue worker running. You know what? Let's go ahead and go into that action, and let's put a little sleep in there, just so we can kind of get something real. All right, so we're just going to have that sleep for 5 seconds. I'm going to restart that worker. All right, so let's go to Muhammad here. Hit deactivate, which he really is deactivated right now since he broke his arm. We wish you a speedy recovery, Muhammad. He does so much for Laravel and has made some awesome Forge features. So round of applause for Muhammad. And if we hit this, run that action, it's processing that, and here it is sleeping. It's running in the background, even though our UI refreshed immediately. All right, so now that's processed. And you see, he was still active when this refreshed because it was still happening. It was still in the queue. But now if we refresh, this is false. So that sort of creates this problem of how do we know when these actions are done? We never had any indication that the action was even running. So let's fix that. Let's go into the user model. Let's mark that as actionable. Let's refresh this. Now I've got a nice audit trail of every action that's happened in Nova on this resource, who it was initiated by, and when it happens. All right, so let's run this again, because it doesn't matter that he's already deactivated. Let's run that. See, that's running there. Go ahead and sit on this for a second. Now it's finished. We can jump into that action and see what it was, who initiated it, what the target was. In this case, it was Muhammad, when it finished, or if it's finished, or whatever its status is, and when it happened in my time zone, so it makes sense to me. It's really nice. All right, and even if I just update Muhammad, update that name, I can see that too, just like a regular action. All right, so queued actions, really nice way to offload that background work, just like you would in a typical Laravel front end. All right, so what about pivot actions? What if we need to run some actions on an intermediate table record? So in this case, we had our users and roles. I've still got this here. Now, of course, roles doesn't have any actions right now. We don't see anything. Let's jump in to, all right, I'm going to look at it from this direction. Since I already have an action on users, it will help it make more sense. Let's jump into that user, I'm in the model, roles field. And what we can do, actions, I'm going to attach an action to that belongs to many relationship. And in this case, since I would define it on both sides, right? I want to define it on the user side and on the role side because I want the action from both sides because I'm always seeing that same pivot row. So I've extracted this action definition into a little invocable again, just so I can share that across those two resources. So in this case, I have an action called update notes, which is just going to update that notes field on the pivot table. And to do that, I need a field on the action. And so every action has a fields method, just like a resource, or I can use any of the field types available in Nova. If I want to stick a big code block in the middle of a pivot table action, that's fine. I want to put a file upload in the middle of a pivot table action, that's fine. In this case, I'm just going to put a notes field and make it required. And then back here, I'm just going to say user role actions. Then I'm going to come over to the role side user field. I'm going to do the same thing here, just so they share that definition. Does that make sense? All right, so now let's take a look at this. Let me make sure that's the right namespace. All right. So if I select this now, I get more options. I can say I can either deactivate on the user resource itself, or it says, hey, you also have a pivot action available since you're viewing the users from a role where you can update the pivot notes. So let's run that. And this time it prompts us for the notes because this action had fields on it. So in this case, this should update the notes for both of these users. Wow, okay. And those are updated. All right, and in that case, that action received a collection of pivot models, which as of Laravel 5.6 are just regular Eloquent models. They just extend the model class just like any other model. So you can do whatever you want with those. All right, let's see. And also, real quick before I move on, you can see it had pivot right here in this drop down, but there actually is a helper where I can call this refer to pivot as method. And I don't know what you would call this, but like role assignment, let's say. You know, just to give it like a better name than pivot, something that makes sense. Go to the role, put it there too. And now instead of pivot, I should see role assignment. So that just lets me know that that's happening on that role assignment record. All right, so that is pivot actions and action fields. So yeah, that's actions. Let's move on to another feature of Nova. All right, I'm going to reseed my database because I can never remember like what I've actually done here. Let's look at another feature, and that's metrics. Laravel has three types, or Nova has three types of metrics we can show here on the dashboard. So first, let me show you a value metric. And to do that, I'm going to create more users again. All right, in this case, I'm just going to create 500 users. And they're created at timestamp is being randomized. So if I go to, for example, my user factory, created at is now subdays, a random int between 1 and 180. So these 500 users are going to be created all over the place over the last 180 days. All right, so let's go ahead and run that. Now I've got 500 users. They should be created at random times. All right, so let's go ahead and generate something. And maybe I want to view the total users in the application. And I want to see how many new users, well, total users, let's say, for the quarter to date, and how that compares to my total users for the last quarter to date. Does that make sense? So to the prior quarter up until the current date. All right, so I can tell you firsthand that's actually pretty gnarly to write by hand. But let's just do it live. I don't have this pre-coded. Say Artisan Nova value. This is a value metric because it's really just showing a single value. Let's call it, I think total users is a pretty good name for this. All right. Let's jump into that class it generated. I put it in Nova metrics. I'm going to jump down here and it says calculate. And I've got this helper called count. Let's just tell it what model we're trying to work with here. It pre-filled these ranges, so over the last 30 days, 60 days, 365 days, month to date, quarter to date, year to date. Let's see what that gives us. Now, it's only taken me like a few seconds to do this. Let's attach it here. In the user resource, we have a cards field. What did I call it? Did I call it total users or new users? Total users. See, we have 78 total users. So over the last 30 days, I've had 78 users, and that's an 8.33% increase over the previous 30 days. Could also go quarter to date. I've had 70 quarter to date, which is a 2.78% decrease over the last quarter to date. Month to date and quarter to date in this case are probably the same because this is the first month of the quarter. The month to date is a little bit different because month to date and quarter to date are not quite the same. So month to date is a little different. And then year to date, it says, since they were all created this year, we have no prior data on that. So we can see our total users are 506 for the year. All right, does that make sense? Over the last 60 days, I had 150 users with a 15% decrease over the previous 60 days. These calculations are pretty gnarly to write if you're trying to build this out, and definitely not something you want to do on every single admin dashboard you do. So it would save you a lot of time. So let's look at another type of metric, which is a trend metric. I'm going to say Artisan Nova trend, new users. All right, I'm going to generate that. While I'm here, I'll just go ahead and add it here. New metrics, new users. Jump into that class. I want to count by days for the user model. New users by day, right there. You can see there, it's right there, how many on each day over the last 60 days. This looks a little cramped, so let's go ahead and go in here. Now our 60 days looks a little better. And what's also cool is if I come into that new users, there's a few other little helpers I can do here. I can tell it to show the latest value. So this is kind of handy in some cases. I can see that 6 were created today, and then I have the chart down underneath where I can look back in time. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and take off that width. Okay, so let's try it with license as a trend metric, because there's some other cool stuff to see there. All right, so let's call this license revenue. License revenue, we don't have to count. Let's do a sum by days on license class. Import that. And we need to give it a column, which is price. I want to see the sum of the licenses sold per day over time. Let's go to that license cards field. New metrics, license revenue. So there that is. Now it's just giving us that, 570, which we know is dollars, just offhand. So let's go ahead and fix that. Let's say dollars. So now we have dollars. Let's say show latest value. 499 licenses, dollars worth of licenses sold today. Oops, open a new window there. And of course we can view back in time over the last 30 days, or I don't even know if I have 60 days worth. Yeah, so it's really easy to view. You don't have to just count. You can sum, you can average, you can min, you can max on these trends and even on the values that I was showing you earlier. All right, so what's also cool is we can cache that. So say this one in particular doesn't take very long. I'll just put a sleep in here. So now it takes a little bit longer. We get that nice loading state, but let's go down here. There's a cache for method. So I want to cache that metric for 5 minutes. All right, so it's going to take a little while. Now it's real quick. We can easily cache those metrics. All right, let's go back to users. And let's make the last kind of metric, which is a partition metric. Let's call that active users, I guess. Go to my users, active users. I think I had a little snippet for this one real quick. Yeah. Just gonna grab that. In this case, oh, that's the wrong field, the wrong class. Metrics. Go into calculate. In this case, I need to give it a, I'm going to do a count. In this case, I'm just going to show a pie chart of who's active, who's inactive. So I'm going to say count the users by the active column, and then I'm going to format that label because in the database that's just like a int, 0 or 1. So I'm going to call this label method and give it a closure that can inspect that label and format it into a more kind of user-friendly way of looking at it. Go ahead and make sure this is imported. And let's see here. Now we got a nice pie chart of who's active and inactive. All right, so I'm a little bit over time, but I have more to show if you want me to keep going. Okay, so one thing we haven't talked about at all, and I'm gonna get rid of some of this just so I have a little bit of a simpler interface to work with again. All right, I'm just gonna blow this all away for now, I think. Let's get back to this. One thing we haven't talked about at all is authorization. So in some applications, of course, you might be the only one using this. Maybe you're building some SaaS, you just need a quick admin panel for you to log into and run some actions on some data or look at some relationships or whatever, update some data. And you want to be able to do everything, which is kind of how we've been using Nova so far. But you don't have to use Nova that way. Like if you're letting a client log into Nova, maybe you don't want them to be able to force delete certain resources. Maybe you don't want them to be able to edit certain resources. Nova makes it really easy to have granular control over basically every operation. And how it works is it uses Laravel's existing policies. So you don't have to learn anything new, no new authorization system to learn. And how this works is if your model, in this case, if my user model, my Eloquent model, has an associated policy, in this case I do, I have a user policy, and right now everything's just returning true all the way down. Nova will automatically use this. So I'm on this user index. If I come into, for example, my update method of my user policy, and I say I only want to be able to update ID 6 user, let's just say. Now, of course, I can update Samantha, but I can't update any other users. And if I go here and try to, switch the URL, 403. And you can customize that if you want to. But I think it looks pretty sweet. I wouldn't change it. Same way with 404, Lost in Space. All right, so we have full control over that. Same way, if I say delete, maybe I don't want to be able to delete this resource. I don't have any little trash cans anymore. I can only view and edit. I can't delete. All right, and I don't even get checkboxes to delete anything here. If I'm viewing the user detail, of course, I don't have the delete icon here either. All right, so let's go ahead and make some deletable. Let's say we can update or we can delete only model ID 6 for the user. So in this case, Samantha has the delete icon and none of the other users do. And if we come in here and we try to select multiple users and hit delete selected, it's not going to delete TJ. It knows you're not authorized to do that on the back end. It only deleted Samantha, so the authorization carries over there as well. All right, let's go ahead and just make it delete everyone again. And let's see, what else can we do here? So that's, update and delete. We could also do, viewing any of a resource entirely. So I have a post policy, view any. I can just set that to false. And now as far as this user is concerned, posts don't even exist in this system at all. So I have a whole resource that I'm hiding for this user and can only show for certain users that are logged in really easily. All right. And so what about relationships? I mean, this is where most admins stop. Create, read, update, delete, true or false. But apps are a little more complicated than that. And sometimes I may have, for example, a post that I can't attach or add comments to, but I can for other posts. And this is also really easy to do. So if I come in here to posts, let's go to my post policy. I have a method called add comment. And this is a convention. So anything add model name is a convention for controlling whether the user can add that type of model to this post or whatever resource I'm dealing with. All right, so if I return false here, I can never attach comments to any post, so I have no create button here at all. I can just view them. But maybe I can do it for some posts. So if the post ID is 50, I can add comments. So now I get the create comment button. And I can go in there and do that right there. This is the morph to, so the morph to type and morph to entity are already set. Since I went straight through the detail screen, I'll have to do search for my user and make my comment. Same way with many-to-many relationships. Maybe I can't attach certain roles to users or whatever. I can go into my user policy. Since this is a many-to-many, I say attach role or attach whatever model you're dealing with. In this case, I can return false. If I drill into a user here, let me show you this. So while I'm on this detail screen, I still have the attach. That's because I was passing a particular role instance into attach. So I have to say true or false, can I attach this particular role right here? Now there may be some situations where you don't want to attach any role. So there's a convention for that. Attach any model name, false. Now I don't even get that attach button at all because I can't attach any roles at all. All right, but if that's true and maybe I can only attach role ID 1 or whatever other, more realistic check you would have in here, and come in here to roles. I can only attach, I have 2 roles in the system, administrator and editor, but I'm only saying administrator because that's the only role I'm allowed to attach, and I can attach it just like that. And so just those conventions, just create, update, delete, and then the add model and attach model gives you full control over every operation in Nova as far as the CRUD goes and authorization. So you have really fine-grained control over attaching, adding, updating, all of that. Just using policies, just using simple PHP code that you're used to. All right, does that all make sense? All right, now let's think about actions again for a second. All right, so let's attach this action, that deactivate action I had. Let's put it back on the user. Actions deactivate. All right, and now I can select a user and run this action. Now, what if I want to authorize who can do that? When I create this action on the user, let's see if they can see this action. Just like that. Now I'm going to say this, I'm going to always return false to hide this action. It's not there anymore. And then I can enable it again, just like that. Now it's back. Now there may be some situations where I can run this actions for certain users, but not for others. So in that case, I need actually 2 methods. So I can see it, sure, but can I run it? Maybe only if, I think it passes me the user here. Maybe only if the ID is 6. Hopefully I didn't mess this up. Sorry, you're not authorized to perform this action. When the ID is 6, it ran successfully. All right, so we have full authorization over actions. Now we can also hide and show certain fields. So we've been showing the email field. I can come up here into my fields. Just like we did on actions, I can do, can we see this field? Maybe false. Now it's not there anymore. So it's really easy to hide certain fields. There's another way to hide fields, which is just this when false. So you don't need any callback at all. That would also hide the field. So you could have some conditional here based on their request. If request user can whatever, some check, then you could show that field. And then it's there. All right. So now, what about the index? If I want to scope what the user can see on a given index. what I can do is I can override certain methods of the resource. So if I go into the post resource, let's go down here to this index query method. And right here I can scope that index query for every time that index is loaded. So in this case, maybe when this user's logged in, I only want to show the posts that belong to that user on the index. I can say right here, where user ID, user ID. Now I only see my posts when I click post here. So it's really easy to limit what a given user can see, and that's kind of related to the authorization system, so it's really easy to fine tune. And I can override the index, I can override what's shown in the relationship search, and I can even override scout queries as well. All right, hopefully that made sense, but we tried to make the authorization really powerful but really simple to use and still cover all the bases for what you would want to authorize. All right, so to wrap up this, let's look at just a couple more things. And for that, I'm going to switch to a different repository that has some other stuff here called Laravel Nova Custom. Now, so far, we've just seen kind of built-in Nova stuff, but what if you want to add your own stuff to Nova? Go to a different site here. We log in. Go to my Nova dashboard, which you can control what that path is for you. And in this case, I want to show you 4 things: custom tools, custom resource tools, custom fields, and custom cards. So let's start with custom tools. So what if I want to put a new tool on this sidebar right here and build some entirely new component in Nova? Say, for example, like a media manager, which I haven't built yet. I'm just saying this is an example that hopefully someone in the community can build, though. But what it looks like is, let me jump back here for a second. And we have a CLI called Nova Tool. And let's say it's called Otwell Media Manager. It kind of looks like a composer thing. And it asks you, do you want to install the NPM dependencies, the tool's assets, and then update your composer package? What it's actually doing is it creates this directory called Nova Components. And it makes a media manager directory. And if I look at that, it's going to create a tool.view in Media Manager. And this is a single file component that you have total control over. You can customize how it looks. You have scope styles. You can make AJAX calls to custom controllers. You have full control over what this component looks like. And when you're ready, you can just go to your Nova service provider, down to your tools method. Let's just return that as a tool. And there it is in the sidebar. And what's great is really how much you can do when we just give you a view component and say, here you go, take it from here. You can make it look however you want. You can make whatever backend calls you want. You can style it however you want. It's really flexible. Anything you can do in a view component with some Laravel backend, you can do in Nova and integrate it right in as a tool that you either keep private to your company, of course, or ship onto GitHub, and which other people can install as a composer package and just return it from their tools method and their Nova service provider. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you build with that. And what's cool is if I jump into that media manager, we can just do something like yarn run watch here. Start watching that. Now if we come back into that tool.view, I can update this file, and it recompiles, and I'm ready to go. So I can just work on it really quickly using Laravel Mix. All right, so that's custom tools. Now, there's also custom resource tools. So a good example of this might be, say you have users, and like I mentioned before, you're using Stripe. And maybe you want to build a custom resource tool that lists all the Stripe charges for that user. Maybe it hits the Stripe API behind the scenes and returns some stuff, and then you show it on the front end. So that's something you would not show on the sidebar. That's something you want to show just on a user's detail screen. So in this case, I have in Nova Components a Stripe inspector just stubbed out. I don't have an actual backend in place. But what we can do is go to like Nova user, go down here to fields, Down here at the bottom, I'm just going to uncomment. I just return it like a field. Stripe inspector make. And in this case, I'm calling this method. And this method is dynamic. And what it will do is pass down this value to the view component. So the view component is going to receive that in its field prop that it receives. I can just say field.show refunds, and it will be true or false. And so it's really easy to pass stuff down into your view component and then use that on the client side. All right, and so what that looks like, so I jump into a user detail. Down here at the bottom, I get a stripe inspector. And since I'm passing true on the client side, it's saying we're showing refunds. If I pass false, that will be passed down to the client side as well, not showing refunds. And similar to sidebar tools, what this actually looks like is just a view component. So in resources.js components, I have a tool.view. I'm receiving the field so I can access that data that I passed from the backend and show whatever I want. I can make any AJAX calls I want, and I can have any scope styles I want. And I can make this component look however I need it to look and make whatever backend calls I need to make. We don't try to box you in. We just sort of think of the view components as a canvas which you can do whatever you want on. All right, so those are resource tools. So there's tools which live in the sidebar and resource tools which live on a resources detail page. All right, so there's also custom cards. Now metrics are cards. So those little cards where I was showing the metrics, the little panels, that's what we call cards in Nova. And I can make custom cards that I can actually put right on the dashboard. So in this case, I actually do have one fully coded out, which David Hemphill built for me, which is a Bitcoin price tracker, just to give an example of what you could do. And just like you might expect, in components, I have a card.view where I can do whatever I want. In this case, I'm making some AJAX calls to an API on CoinDesk, showing some data, displaying it using Tailwind. And now if I go into my Nova service provider, cards, this help card, that's what you're seeing when I go to the dashboard. And you're seeing those kind of links into the documentation. That's just what we ship to kind of stub out that dashboard. I can remove that. New Bitcoin price, import it. Now we get that card right there on our dashboard with the current Bitcoin price. So you can build whatever custom cards you want. Anything you can do in a view component, you can build right into your Nova dashboard. All right? And now finally, the last feature I wanted to show you is custom fields. So you may run into fields that you need that aren't built into Nova. For example, the Markdown and the tricks, that was all built in. But what if you have something that's not built in? You're not just stuck. You can create a custom field. So in this case, I'm just doing a color picker, just a really simple one. And now, whereas tools and cards and resource tools just had a single view component, a field actually has three. So if I go into resources.js components, I have one for the detail screen, one for the index screen, and one for the form screen. On the detail screen, we have this panel item component, which just gives you kind of the default detail screen display. We have an index, which I'm just showing as a span, just to show the field's value. And on the form, I have the input with type color. And we have some helpers called form field and handles validation errors, which makes it where you don't have to worry about displaying the validation errors as much. It kind of gives you some helpers like has error, first error, stuff like that. And what this looks like is we have a method for setting the initial value of the field. And then when the form is actually being sent up to the server, it passes us the form data so we can append whatever we need to. We can append multiple things. Just because this is one field, we could put 3 things into the form data going up to the server. It doesn't really matter. And then we can handle the value change however we want. And so we would use this just how you might expect. I just return it just as a field in my Nova resource. In this case, I'm going to call it favorite color, which I have in the database, and I'm going to hide it from the index. All right, so if I jump into a user, dig in here and edit, now I have this custom field, color selector, and I can save that. And it uses my detail view here to show it right on the details. So if you need a field, you can generate it using the CLI. Nova field will generate all the stubs and view components. You can ship it out on GitHub if you want to share it with everyone else, and then you have a totally custom field that's extended what Nova can do out of the box. The color picker fields also ship with a backend class. This lets you control how the field is actually stored in the database once the server gets it. So you can override a few methods like resolve and fill, where fill will actually fill the model attribute with the value, and resolve will resolve it out of the database, and that lets you format or do whatever you want to do. But by default, it just sort of behaves as a text field would, where it just sets the value, just plops it into the model attribute and hits save. All right, so that's custom fields. Okay, so that's an overview of Laravel Nova. Hopefully that feels like something that could be useful. I know at least I'm going to use it the first day it comes out. So I'm actually going to go ahead and launch out the Nova site for y'all. Swap that to true. And Forge should take care of auto-deploying that out to production, hopefully. There we go. So that's an introduction to Nova. It's I think, a best-in-class administration panel. Me and David and Steve, we really tried to sweat the small details with this, because there's a lot of products out there that feel like they're not all the way thought through, or they don't make sense for production applications. So with me having Forge and Envoy, it sort of gave me something to dog food and say what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and where are admin panels really not really fleshed out, like the global search, the authorization, viewing the relationship from a detail screen, integrating with Scout, all of that stuff that makes it really cool, queued actions, to really give you a quality product that's well tested on the back end, hundreds of front end tests, hundreds of back end tests, so you can really depend on it. And it's going to launch next month. We're going to if you sign up on this list, we're going to kind of bleed out early access into Nova so you can get your hands on it. And there's going to be it's going to be similar to Spark, where it's a similar license, just $99 for a solo developer. That's anyone that's just hacking on something for themselves, or anyone that's making less than $20,000 a year on their business, or $199 for commercial businesses that are doing, if you're doing projects for clients and teams, that's a commercial license. So I hope you love it. I have 1,000 Laravel Nova stickers that we can distribute at the after party, which are super rare. And be sure to come eat and drink, and we can talk about Nova and check out the science experiments. Thanks.